This is Nigel Farage bringing you the latest edition of Phone Farage on LBC. I'm here for the next 30 minutes taking your calls, and this is your chance to put any question you like to me. I'll do my very best to answer it. So the number for you to get in touch and get your question on air is 0345 60 60 973. That's 0345 60 60 973. And don't forget, you can also watch Phone Farage on the website lbc.co.uk. And our first caller this morning is Jacob in Ruislip. Good morning.
Hello, good morning, Mr. Farage.
Good morning.
Hello?
Yes, good morning.
Go ahead with your question, young Jacob.
Yes, this is my question. Okay. It's not a secret that Gibraltar has been disputed between England and Spain for so many years, and I'm sure by the time that England finally decide to pull out of the European Union, Spain will one day probably forcefully take the land of Gibraltar. If that happens, a bitter war could break out between Spain and England. And my question is this, Mr. Farage: if the war do finally break out, are you going to push the button and say, dirty nuclear weapons to my country and wipe my innocent family out, Mr. Farage?
Oh, well, goodness me.
Wow, that's an escalation.
There's quite a bit going on there, Jacob.
I hope you had a coffee this morning, Mr. Farage.
I must declare an interest in this. My uncle was a dentist in Gibraltar for many years, and so we got some family links with the place.
So you're unlikely to wipe it off the face of the earth.
I love Gibraltar. It's a great place. And booming, by the way. It really, really changed. You know, it used to be rotten pubs and fish and chips, and now Gibraltar...
Is that right?
Yeah, they've been reclaiming land, a lot of investment going in there, and it's doing really, really well.
I think the point we're driving at, which is quite an interesting one, though, if we move it more broadly, another political leader got himself in a spot of hot water this week by saying he wouldn't have the button, he wouldn't press the button if he had the bomb. Well, why have it anyway? Where do you stand, Mr. Farage?
Right. Point number one: Gibraltar is British. The people had a referendum there a couple of years ago, and over 99% of people voted for Gib to stay part, with its link with the United Kingdom, and that's not going to change, regardless whether Britain's in the European Union or not. The Spanish are rotten to us over Gibraltar, regardless whether we're in the European Union or not, so I don't see that making much difference. On the bigger question, I have to say, I haven't heard the debate about unilateralism since I was in sixth form in about 1981, and suddenly it's back alive and well in British politics, which says a lot about where Mr. Corbyn's coming from. I do not think that unilateralism makes sense in a very dangerous world. We all hate nuclear weapons. None of us can bear the thought of them having to be used. But I do actually think, Jacob, that since 1945, what have been the great guarantors of peace in Europe are not a few bureaucrats in Brussels, but actually NATO and the fact that we had a nuclear deterrent. So I think we should have a nuclear deterrent. I think any British leader has to say that there would be circumstances in which they would be prepared.
And you would support that in the worst case scenario?
In the very worst case scenario, we should be prepared, or send that message out to the world that we would be prepared to use it. And I think that if you think back to about 1985-6, the Labour Party ripped itself to shreds on this very issue. And the vast majority of the British public think, rightly in my opinion, that the primary duty of the British government is at all costs to defend the nation and defend its people.
We move on to other... Jacob, thank you for getting us to an interesting start. We move on.
And next we go to Paul in London Bridge. Good morning.
Morning, Nigel. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Great stuff. Listen, I hope you answer this question the way a man in the street would answer it.
Right.
Basically, honestly, because we all know what Nick's like at spinning your answers. So
My fault.
I agree, Paul. I'm with you, absolutely, mate. Right, far away.
Definitely. Well, every time I'm always listening, and it's always different. But it's a very straight answer. I know how I feel as being 100% UKIP.
Okay.
I just want to know your intake on the airstrikes that's occurring with Russia, because I think they've taken the full responsibility. I'd like to know your answer.
Well, what they've done is to take the initiative. I mean, look, had it not been for Mr. Putin, who, by the way, I'm not a member of his fan club, but had it not been for Mr. Putin 2 years ago, William Hague and David Cameron were going to arm the rebels who were fighting Assad. We would, by default, have finished up arming ISIS. Now Mr. Putin, after his brief photo opportunity with President Obama, has got into action and effectively sort of checkmated America in terms of what they will or won't do. Paul, it seems to me that on the most important issue that we face, the biggest global threat we face, which is radicalism and is ISIS, we need to recognise that actually, whatever we think of them as human beings, Assad and Putin on this big game are actually on our side. Do I think Britain should get involved in military action in Syria? Let me say this to you, Paul. I've watched British military action in Iraq destabilise a country and arguably make it much worse. I've watched British military action in Libya, which was unthinkably stupid, which has made things really absolutely terrible. I would need to be persuaded we had a proper, genuine, long-term strategy before thinking we should get involved in this. Because the problem is, it's all well and good, killing thousands of ISIS fighters, but who's to say they won't just recruit more? So Putin will do what Putin does. He's on Assad's side. He's against ISIS. I'd rather be that side of the argument, but I'm as yet unconvinced that we should be involved.
Paul, you wanted an answer as if it was a man on the street, and is that what you got?
I got it 100%.
All right, well done. Thank you. Just on this, a quick one from me, Nigel Farage, if I may. It is reported that Russia are bombing, in some instances, CIA-backed rebel forces, if that information is correct. What should Britain do in that instance?
The whole thing is so desperately complicated that I repeat, this is not about good guys and bad guys. It isn't as simple as that. And surely we must have learnt that after Iraq and after Libya. It's a very, very complex situation. I need to be persuaded that if we're going to get involved, there is a clear long-term strategy. At the moment, I haven't heard.
And you're not overly worried by Putin's actions?
I'm not surprised by Putin's actions at all, because he clearly supports the Assad regime. I think the arguments for not getting involved are much stronger than the arguments for getting involved.
Where do we go now, Mr.
We go to Leo in Geneva.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for having me. Nigel, I just wanted to get your opinion on something I've been thinking about recently, which is that sort of Britain and many other European countries seem to slowly but surely be losing their identity. Now, I guess the problem with this topic is you can't say anything without being branded a racist, but I kind of get the feel that multiculturalism has gone so far over the last, say 20-odd years that, say, for example, Britain, it just feels like we don't really know who we are anymore. And now no one is saying that multiculturalism is a bad thing. It's an amazing thing. Like, my family were immigrants years ago, etc. But it just feels like it's gone so far now that we don't know who we are.
Leo, it depends what we mean by the use of that word, doesn't it? If we talk about multiculturalism as meaning that we have people come to Britain from other parts of the world that generally, make the place look a bit brighter and jollier and give us restaurants far better than we could have managed on our own, of which I have no doubt, then fine. But if multiculturalism means that you see whole sections of your towns and cities change culturally beyond all recognition, where in places English is not the first language of choice, you begin to ask yourself, what has happened to the identity of our country? It's very interesting. John Cleese, who's a very, Liberal Democrat leaning, sort of centre-left figure, said that he fails to see London anymore as being an English city. So
do you agree with that, Mr. Farage?
Well, in parts of London, I do. Yes, I do, and I think, and that's why actually, Leo, the intelligent thing is to have an immigration policy where you have proper restrictions on the numbers that come. If you have an uncontrolled flow, the hopes of people assimilating and becoming part of one society are virtually impossible. But you're right, it's very difficult territory. I remember saying a couple of years ago that I called a train out from Charing Cross, and it wasn't until we got past sort of Grove Park that I generally heard English spoken around me. And I was met with a sort of avalanche of abuse from those that support multiculturalism, who tend to live in £3 million houses in Notting Hill, and think mass immigration's good because it gives them cheaper nannies. But in terms of the makeup of our society, Leo, I agree with you.
So if areas have changed, and let's perhaps think of an area in London such as Southall or Tower Hamlets or Tottenham, why does it matter if that area has gone very Asian or it's gone very Caribbean or whatever?
Because I think what happens is, if you get too big a change in an area, you get resentment. You get resentment from the population that were there to begin with, and sometimes you sort of get the reinforcement of a whole area as being culturally completely different to its neighbour. Now, some may say that's fine. I actually think that I'd rather live in a society where, regardless of race or class, for that matter, people mixed together and lived in a big community. I mean, the class thing's equally, a problem. I mean, if you
sorry, the class thing.
We'll take I'm talking about wealth.
I see.
I mean, look at Kensington and Chelsea. The rich all live in gated communities. They never meet people from a different social background. And is that the kind of society that I want to live in? No.
Quick response from what you've heard, Leo.
I agree with pretty much everything that's been said. It just feels like now that when people are coming to the UK, there just doesn't seem to be that inherent sense that they need to mould to how the UK is.
I think that's very much what Mr. Farage is saying.
I agree with that. And there is a story, Leo, overnight about a house that was raided by police just yesterday, where there are 40 Romanians living in one house. And frankly, it's like a return to slavery. It's like all the great sort of London reforms that the Victorians brought in, actually, through free movement of people, through not doing proper checks on whether people are members of gangs or being trafficked, has seen us socially go backwards in many ways.
David Davis, the Conservative MP for Monmouthshire, that David Davis told me, was speaking this week on this programme, and said he has concerns about the number of people arriving in this country with different faiths, because typically they don't have as much tolerance for gay people, they don't have as much religious tolerance. We even had an extraordinary story in Accrington where they removed the cross from the crematorium in case it upset anybody of a different faith. Do you see the makeup of Europe changing, the makeup of Britain changing, and indeed possibly less tolerance?
Well, yes, in some ways I do. I mean, as far as Britain's concerned, I've said for years that we need to be much more muscular in our defence of our Judeo-Christian culture and heritage. And I was interested, having said that for about 18 months, to hear the Prime Minister use exactly the same words. Let's hope he means it. So we've got to stand up for who we are, and we've got to send that message, and Leo touched on this in the previous question, that, if you're coming to Britain, become part of us. Don't expect us to become part of you. And that is really very, very strong. One of the arguments over the migrant crisis is coming from the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, who says, look, I'm very concerned in a country that is deeply Catholic and deeply Christian, that if we have too many people in this country from the Muslim faith, it is going to present genuine problems. And actually, we already see specimens of this, don't we? We talk about, perhaps a bit early in the morning, but female genital mutilation, or the way that perhaps the gay community are treated. So there are problems with this, and we are treading on eggshells to try and move forwards.
Just before we move to the next call, you listen to LBC News breaking at this time, 9:15. It has been confirmed Zach Goldsmith will fight the London mayor election as a Conservative candidate. Interesting here, we'll be speaking with Mr Goldsmith at 9:45, at half an hour's time. He got 70% of the vote. 70% of the vote. Quick response on that, Nigel Farage. No surprise, I would imagine, Nigel Farage.
I like Zach. He's utterly charming, and he's from a different party, but in one way I do wish him well, because I hope, unlike Corbyn, that he is not gagged by his own party. I'm convinced that Zach believes this country should be an independent, self-governing nation outside the European Union. And I hope you ask him that at 9:45.
Put a question now. You put a question, we'll play it to him at 9:45. Nigel Farage.
Zach, many congratulations on getting the nomination. I knew you'd do it. Now, you are now in a very important position. You could be the next mayor of London, but also, during that campaign, there's going to be a referendum campaign going on as well. I think, Zach, that deep in your heart of hearts, you believe we should be trading with Europe and not members of the European Union, and get back control of our country. Will you be saying that in your mayoral campaign?
Stay tuned, 9:45.
He'll hate me for that.
What makes you think he likes you now? We move on.
OK, we move on to David in Mill Hill. Good morning.
Good morning. Nigel, can you please tell me why no one is talking about, particularly yourself, of all the money that will be saved by leaving the EU, how it will be spent in this country?
How much money are we talking about, Mr. Farage? Per year, per month, or however it works out?
Yeah, well, we roughly, put in about £20 billion a year. And get back less than half of it. And it's very interesting that the amount of money, gross and net, that Britain pays into the European Union goes up every year. And you might remember, David, there was a 1.7 billion surcharge put on Britain about 14 months ago. Do you remember suddenly this bill arrived that Britain had to pay more? And the Prime Minister stood up on the lectern and banged his fist and said, we will fight this and we will not allow this to happen. And you know what? Just after the general election, we just paid it. We just paid it. And this week, the European Parliament committee met, and they're demanding an extra 400 million for the budget. So this goes up and up and up and up and up. In gross terms, perhaps to make it easy to understand, because billions are a very difficult concept for any of us, frankly.
Yes.
£55 million a day is what we pay in.
£55 million a day
is our membership fee to the European Union. And my view, David, is we do actually have a major health crisis in this country. People won't admit the reason why, but it's actually rather simple. Our population has gone from 55 million 25 years ago to 65 million now, although actually one suspects it's rather higher than that. We have a major health crisis. We do not have the doctors. We do not have the hospitals to cope with our size of population. And I think if we say, let's leave the European Union, let's save this money, and let's boost our health services, that might be a very convincing argument. What do you think?
I think you're absolutely right, and I'm very pleased to be able. I, as a concept, do understand it, and I think more can be done for society. Maybe even build some homes, with the money that we save, so people have got somewhere to live. Because that's also an important factor that the Labour Party were talking about, but they never mentioned immigration at their conference.
Well, of course not. In fact, I'm not sure Corbyn mentioned anything really, did he? Apart from a series of platitudes. But again, you see, David, housing is directly linked to membership of the European Union. Because of the open door policy that we've got, we now have to build a new dwelling every 7 minutes in Britain just to cope with current levels of immigration. And none of these arguments are being against anybody. What we're saying is we need to get a grip and make life better for our own people. Thank you.
Some text, email and tweeted questions coming in, Mr. Farage. Ron, can you ask Nigel Farage, does he honestly see Jeremy Corbyn as a potential future Prime Minister?
No.
Okay, well, another one as we're coming in, and thank you for being so brief. Nigel, this is from Wendy in West Wickham. Nigel Lawson says that he now wants to lead the Get Out campaign. I don't think he should. It should be Nigel Farage. Please get him to confirm he will do that.
Nigel Lawson yesterday was really very odd. He said, look, we are Conservatives of Britain and we want everybody to come and join our campaign. But I can't see the trade union movement joining Conservatives for Britain. I can't see lifelong Labour supporters joining Conservatives for Britain. I think, that was wrong. What I think, Wendy, is this. We need a big umbrella group to bring together people from across the political spectrum. And I personally think that Leave.eu, which is the consortium set up by Aaron Banks and some businessmen, is trying to do exactly that. Who in the end, in the last month of this, is seen to be the senior figure, the dominant figure, at the moment isn't relevant. What I can promise you, Wendy, is I am going to put my heart and soul into this campaign. I'm midway through a tour around the country, which will go on relentlessly until polling day, and I will give everything I've got to this campaign.
You mentioned Mr. Banks, Aaron Banks. He's quoted in the papers today as suggesting, or he would be happy to support you, Nigel Farage, if you stood down from UKIP and gave, quotes, total focus to the Leave.eu campaign.
Well, Mr. Banks is doing wonderful work and he's full of ideas. Entrepreneurs are. But I also think UKIP is a very important cog, in this whole campaign. We're the only Eurosceptic group.
So you can ride two horses at this time?
I can fight this campaign, but I'm also conscious, Nick, that we've got, on May the 5th next year, elections in London, in Wales, in Scotland, and in Northern Ireland. And given that we've got proportional representation, and I speak as a party leader who was kicked fairly hard under the first past the post system, we've got a fantastic chance to increase UKIP's elected representation next May.
And lastly, does Lord Lawson bring anything to the campaign?
For people who are conservatives and on the centre-right of politics, seeing a respected figure like that they voted for back in the 1980s, and they've probably forgotten now that he actually wanted us to join the exchange rate mechanism and was very pro-EU, but, a sinner that repenteth and all that. So to a certain segment of the population, Lord Lawson is a big beast. And the fact that he's come out and said this is a good thing. But the idea that somebody with that background could be, the focal point for people of left and right around politics to coalesce around is nonsense.
We move to other calls.
We do. We move to Josh in Ruislip. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Farage. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Nice to speak to you. My mum and her best friend Vera are big fans.
Very good.
I just want to know if you think that the government have been tough enough on VW throughout the whole scandal.
Well,
that was a groan. You don't drive one, do you, Mr. Farage?
No, I don't. Josh, here's the truth of it. We have had a total obsession with carbon dioxide. We have been convinced that carbon dioxide, the very thing that Nick and I are breathing out in this studio as we speak, we have been convinced that it's the greatest evil in the world. And in our efforts to try and reduce carbon dioxide emissions, we've completely sort of forgotten about nitrous oxide and all sorts of other very serious pollutants. And I think the VW scandal is one of the biggest corporate scandals we've seen, frankly, in our lifetime. And I personally believe that the European Commission have got some very, very big questions to answer. I think our focus...
What do you mean by that, Mr. Farage?
Frankly, I think the feeling in Brussels, and I was there on Wednesday, is that a lot of people inside the European Commission knew that things were not being done properly, but nobody was prepared to blow the whistle.
This is big business, perhaps, a too cosy relationship.
Is the relationship between the giant corporates and a form of government in Europe where the people that propose the laws aren't voted for and can't be removed. And I think the VW scandal is a direct result of that. And I would say to you, Josh, given that we've only got a few minutes left, we can't do this in depth today, but there does need to be a really big debate. Yes, it may well be that if we massively increase carbon dioxide emissions, that may lead to some change in our environment, but we shouldn't forget about all the other pollutants that perhaps in the short term do far more damage.
We've got a couple more minutes, and I want to play something into you, Mr. Farage, because we've been running a series of reports over the last couple of days from our reporter Tom Swarbrick, who's gone to Lesbos, the front line of the crisis that actually we've touched on already. And while he was there, he's got this question for you from Ellie, who's working with the people as they come out of the craft. This is what Ellie from Lesbos wanted to ask you.
So my question to you, Mr. Farage, is will you come to Lesbos Island? Will you come here and stand in the water with us and lift these babies out of the water and bring them to shore? Will you come and help take the soaking wet clothes off an 8-year-old child and see the atrocious burns on their body from chemical warfare in Syria? I'm asking you, Mr. Farage, to extend your hand to humanity and come here and help us.
Well, Ellie, what I want to do is to stop people falling out of dinghies, drowning. We saw a picture of a young boy that shocked the country and shocked much of the world. Actually, we could have seen 3,000 pictures of that, because 3,000 people have drowned this year crossing the Mediterranean. Why? Because the European Union have sent a message that virtually regardless of who you are, whether you're somebody with burns on their back from mustard gas, or whether you're purely an economic migrant, as long as you set foot on European soil, you will be allowed to stay. And indeed, Chancellor Merkel amplified that call by saying, please come. So, Ellie, we're doing this all the wrong way round. We should not be encouraging people to come across the Mediterranean.
Are we encouraging, or are they just so desperate? If their children are being burnt, they're just...
We're playing into...
You and I, with family men, we'd get our kids out of there, Mr. Farage.
The vast majority of people who are coming are not coming from Syria, all right? There are more Kosovans and Albanians using some of the eastern borders than people who are coming from Syria. I have always said, I've said on this show before, and I'll say it again, that a civilized country should be able to provide refuge, for genuine refugees, people in fear of direct persecution because of their religion or their race or their political beliefs. But Ellie, I'd also say this to you. According to the UNHCR, There are currently 59 million displaced people through war. Are you seriously suggesting, Ellie, that we should encourage them all to come to Lesbos? We have to get a sense of perspective on this, and we have to get the criminal trafficking gangs out of the equation. Thank you very much.
We move on to other questions.
OK, we're going to Ijuru in Kensington.
Hi, Nigel.
Hello.
You earlier mentioned that in your code you said you rejected multiculturalism, and you said be either like us or stay away. Now my question is, in your world, as a Muslim with a young son, do I have to become a Christian or Jewish? Or
no,
I don't have a space in this country.
No,
Can I be a Muslim and British at the same time?
Yeah, let me get Mr. Farage. No, that is an excellent question. Look, we have had over the centuries, we've had refugees with different religions come to Britain, and let's take the Jewish migrations to Britain from Russia in the early part of the 20th century, and then of course from Germany, Austria and places in the 1930s. The Jewish people have integrated phenomenally well in British society, been a very, very successful group within our communities in business and science and elsewhere. And the Jewish community have privately observed their faith without seeking to change, let's say the Church of England, the established faith of this country. That is a very good example of coexistence. And I'm quite sure, Ijuru, that the vast majority of Muslim worshippers are exactly the same. However, there are a number of people from the extremes of Islam who seem to think their mission in Britain is to do away with us as a Christian country and convert us to Islam or Sharia law or whatever it may be. And I just think, when you look at Australia says to people, we welcome all of you. We don't care where you come from. We don't care what your religion is. We don't care what your colour is. But if you come here, recognise that you are joining our society. And that is the point that I'm making. And I hope that satisfies your fears.
Let's get one last email question and then one final question in from one of our callers, Mr. Farage. Len in Leicester says, this week the Prime Minister has been asked to apologise and pay reparations to Jamaica. Should he do either of those?
No, we've done too much apologising for the past. Endless, getting the Queen to apologise for the Amritsar disaster. The Archbishop of Canterbury going through the streets of Canterbury in sackcloth and ashes, apologising for slavery. Apologising? We got rid of slavery. And we actually stopped other countries getting involved in slavery. You cannot keep apologising for the past.
What about reparation, actual financial payment that's also been floated?
I just reject the concept. Let's get on with life as it is, shall we?
So we move to the final question for today then, Mr. Farage.
The final question is from Richard in Eastbourne. Good morning.
Morning, Nigel. Hope you're well.
Yeah, fine.
There's an upcoming debate in the House of Commons about the legalisation of cannabis. I just want to know what your views are on that.
And this, as Nick Clegg will today, Richard, listeners, launch a campaign to persuade EU leaders to back global reform of drugs laws, warning the current punitive approach has failed to curb the multi-billion illicit trade. We've effectively lost the war against drugs. It's time to move on. Says Nick, you may remember Mr. Clegg, by the way. Nigel Farage.
I do remember Gold Cleggers, absolutely. Yes, I think we're going to see him again as part of the Euro debate. So
good.
If you could broker another get-together, I'd be absolutely delighted.
Work will start straight after the show.
Richard, I hate cannabis. I hate the effect it has on people. What people now smoke and think is a recreational drug is 20 to 30 times stronger than the stuff, that was being smoked in the late 1960s. It is causing a huge amount of psychosis and damage within our society. I hate it. But I also hate the fact that so many criminal gangs make so much money out of trafficking it and selling it. I am beginning to think that when we look at cannabis, we're looking a bit like prohibition of alcohol in America, that it's just not working. What we're doing just isn't working. My own party very strongly take the view that cannabis is illegal and we should enforce that illegality. I take the view that if ever there was time to have a genuine Royal Commission, not to kick it into the long grass, but to have a genuine Royal Commission. What I want to know, Richard, is in Portugal and in Switzerland, where they've decriminalised cannabis and other drugs, what is the net effect 10 years on? Has it been better for society? Has it been worse for society? Does it mean more people take it? Does it mean fewer old ladies get knocked over the head and have their handbags grabbed? I don't know
the answers to those
I
questions.
don't know the answers.
I'm sorry, I thought you were going to show it.
No, I don't know the answers, but what I do know is that when I see a government minister every year talking about the war on drugs, I just laugh because we're losing.
So you're actually open, you could be persuaded of the merits of where Mr Clegg might be taking this.
If somebody said to me that 10 years on, the streets of Portugal were safer and that those who have a drug problem have better access to medicine and to counselling and everything else, I would be, I'm persuadable. And I'm persuadable, not because I'm soft on drugs, far from it. I hate these drugs. I hate what they're doing to our young people. But maybe the current policy isn't working.
Nigel Farage, thank you. Stay tuned. Coming up after the news, Nigel's question to Zach Goldsmith, the man who is the Conservative candidate for Mayor of London. How will Mr Goldsmith respond to that? But this has been Phone Farage here on LBC, where news is next.